Curious Case Manager, is Niall Baker, and Niall is the Managing Partner of the Court of Protection and Public Law teams at Irwin Solicitors. And Niall, thank you so much for joining us today.
Delighted to join you. Nice to see you, Vicky.
And you, and I'm looking forward very much to having a conversation with you today, because every conversation I've always had with you has been great fun, very interesting, and stuck in my mind.
I'll try and behave.
No,
I can't guarantee it.
Please don't behave. We like you much better when you don't. Okay, so I just thought I'd kick us off by asking you to just describe a little bit about your role and the teams that you manage, just briefly.
Okay, I'm based in our Sheffield office, and I have a few roles really, and we have two departments. Which we have a Court of Protection department, which is effectively financial deputyships, and we have which is based around 9 officers. And we also have a public law department. Many people would probably call them Court of Protection for all of them, but because the Court of Protection team solely do the finance, but the public law do the welfare elements of the Court of Protection side as well. But they do other work around educational statements and other work as well of that nature. We have approximately 250 people in the two teams. And probably I think it's 16 partners and probably towards 60 or 70 solicitors, and so it's quite big. And we are very fortunate that we've got plenty of good clients, and try to do our best for them, which is not always easy with people with acquired brain injuries and the issues that they face in this world, particularly currently.
Well, indeed, and we're recording this in the middle of the coronavirus pandemic as measures have started to lift a little, which is potentially a more confusing environment for clients.
It's been a confusing environment for a lot of them, full stop, from day one, indeed. With complaints about why the pubs weren't open, etc. From day one, and people not understanding what they've got to do. And obviously quite a lot of work to do just to make sure that clients are safe, that their carers are suitably trained, have the suitable equipment, they have the letters that they can go to the supermarket and leave the house and go do shopping and various other things. So there's a lot of initial work to be done. And then obviously we've also had to look at the question of furloughs and all the other treatment we've got with clients, because we've had every end of the spectrum really, because we've had clients who wanted to completely self-isolate with no carers coming in, with just family. And we've had clients who wanted to continue to be able to go out every single day with their carers because they couldn't change their regime because it wouldn't work for them. And so we've tried to work around and help as we can in a remote fashion, which has been a challenge, but I think we've risen to it reasonably well. There have been hiccups, of course there have, but on the whole, it's gone all right. And what I'm particularly impressed with is the grasp of technology that so many of our clients have, and they've grabbed it very, very quickly to be able to continue to have obviously interaction we need with them.
They have, haven't they? And I guess it's also been the case that without anything else, people have had a huge willingness, and we've noticed that sometimes family members have been in the house, and so there's more support as well. But generally, everyone I speak to is surprised at how well that's actually gone.
Well, I think it's changed us forever, because if you think about the fact that, traditionally we'd have done a number of multidisciplinary team meetings, and it would always have gone to social services office or a case manager's office or a solicitor's office or whatever. Now they're all done online, Zoom, Teams, whatever. And I'd be very surprised if that ever changes. It's a more efficient way. It gets everyone together. People don't have to take their whole day out travelling or going somewhere. It's cheaper for the client. It's probably more efficient for everyone else. So I think we've changed full stop. The question is how we embrace the good bits and go back to doing other things more traditionally if it's better for the client. And that's going to be a challenge.
I think so, and there's clear cost savings we can make. Some of the things that have been exercising us are the idea, though, that there are times when you feel you are missing something. I think often when there are difficult things that need discussing, and when you need a collaboration, the sort of discussion where people might interact with each other or interrupt each other in order to throw something around in quite a complex way. and that there may still be times when one would need to do that, but you'd need to evidence why you needed it, I suspect, in the future.
The difficulty with that is you often don't know. And one of the requirements of a deputy generally is to go and visit someone in their own home once a year, if nothing else, to check that the house is still there, and that they've got the furniture that you paid for on their behalf, etc. And check that there's not, lots and lots of other people living there, as has happened to us during lockdown, where we had illegal immigrants moved into a house of one of our clients. We've had to have them evicted, and various other things, and people trafficking issues. The lot. So you know that all these things can happen, and you don't. The one thing which you can't get from a video call is the interaction between different people in a room. So you can sense if there's something not right, and you can then probe and try to see if you can find out. You don't always, but you can then come away and maybe have a word with the case manager saying, "There's something not right there, and I don't know what it is yet." And often you'll be on the same wavelength to say, "Yeah, spotted it. We'll have to keep an eye on that." That you can't get by electronic means. And
no, and I would recognise that as the sort of scenario where we might get that call and then go out and also do a series of visits, because it takes a few goes before what your spidey senses have picked up turns into something that we can all understand. And then
the spidey sense is one of those really impossible things to explain to people, particularly when you're trying to train someone. You've got a training solicitor with you and you say something not right, and they go, "What are you talking about?" It's like, "Oh, it's spidey sense, actually." You just know. And I've been on numerous hilarious home visits, but obviously do need intervention. When, for example, sitting down on someone's settee in Doncaster and him saying, "Just be careful." And I said, "Well, why is that?" "I've lost a snake." And I said, "Well, why are you telling me that?" "I think he's in the settee." So, and then him releasing a polecat in the room, which then span around the room on the walls because it was wild and he'd trapped it in the woods. Jenny ran around the actual walls like a wall of death around the room.
And was this in the same visit?
In the same room where the snake was, yes.
Extraordinary. Did you find the snake?
No. It was a python as well, apparently. No, I didn't stay long, in fairness. I didn't stay long at all. But if I was doing that electronically, I'd have never known about those two things. And we did get a little bit of help for him then, because obviously he wasn't taking his medication at the time and there was some issues. So that's the stuff that you really miss. And I also miss the client contact, because of all the things that we do, yeah, we do the accounts, yeah, we do the investments, yeah, we pay their bills and everything else. But actually, it's the client interaction that's the most enjoyable, and actually the thing that makes the biggest difference, hopefully, to them, because you can then hopefully help them out on some of the stuff that they don't even spot as an issue yet. But you can kind of anticipate it and try to help them. And I think that we are missing on that, and that's the real gap in this scenario that we have at the moment. Although a lot of things, frankly, more efficient. And there's been a lot of people who've stepped up massively. So national savings, we're able to do everything with electronic signatures and everything now, which we never could before. Court Funds Office have been brilliant in electronic signatures there. We're able to make court applications electronically, which we never could before. The Supreme Court Costs Office accepting files electronically. We have moved on hugely in certain areas. I hope to God we keep it, if we ever come out of this scenario, in the same way. I hope we keep all those things, but for the client, it's going to make things hopefully more reasonable in terms of cost, keep costs down and make us more efficient. And that's got to be a good thing.
It has, and some of the things you mentioned there, and I'm sure we could dream up a list of a lot of others as well, that always seem nonsensical in this modern world, that some things are more difficult than they should be. So if they've become easier, that's, for our client group especially, that's
fantastic. Well, I'll give you an example. You want to put some money into national savings. So you want to put £1 million on behalf of a client into a national savings account. Traditionally, we had to have, for us, 3 signatures, wet signatures, around and off it to get that put in. And as I've said, why do I need a signature to put money in? And the national savings have kind of gone, yeah, that's a good point. But we've never thought about it because we've never been challenging ourselves in relation to that way. So And so I think that most people have been really positive about this catalyst for change and tried to find solutions. So as an example, with case managers, we basically said, if you want paying, you're going to get paid electronically. We're not going to issue checks anymore, and we want all your bills electronically. There were some few, in fairness, who couldn't do that. As soon as we introduced that you won't get paid unless you get it electronically, amazing, we all can do it. It's brilliant.
That's a definite improvement, I think. Can I just circle back round to deputyship and
yes.
also the public law team, just to clarify for people the client group. So the client group are people who are vulnerable, who lack capacity to manage their own financial and property affairs. Can you just talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, okay. As everyone will know, obviously we had a new act which came into force in 2007, because prior to that it was very, very black and white. You could manage your affairs or you couldn't. And quite clearly that wasn't correct. And people have varying capacities dependent upon the actual decisions to be made. The new, obviously, act recognised that. And so now what happens is that there are two types of deputy as well. There used to only be a financial deputy before. Now there's a financial and potentially a welfare deputy, although there's a lot less welfare deputies than there are financial ones. And the client base varies massively, from very young children under the age of 5, right the way through to clients in their 90s, and I think we've even got one over 100, who are all in the position that they, in their particular circumstances, aren't able to manage their own finances overall. In terms of the welfare aspects, which we deal with through our public law team, that's slightly more complicated because the courts are generally reluctant to give welfare deputyships out, and rather would deal with individual decisions that need to be made on an ongoing basis. That's not totally, black and white. It depends on the circumstances, and there may be reasons why a welfare deputy would be appointed. But it's one of those ones you don't automatically make an application for a welfare deputy, whereas if someone's incapable of managing their finances, then you do automatically make an application for a deputyship, assuming there's no power of attorney in place. And so we have majority of our clients would be acquired brain injury coming through the PI, personal injury route, and also obviously through clinical negligence as well, through generally a number of cerebral palsy clients as well. They have totally disparate needs, and they're all individuals, and there is no such thing as a standard client. Doesn't exist. Every single client's different from their personal circumstances and the family that you deal with if they're not able to deal with themselves. And so, yeah, that's part of the enjoyment of the work, is you get to meet a lot of different people from a lot of different walks of life, from a lot of different places in the country. So we're very lucky, really. And we also have an opportunity to work with people and hopefully make a positive difference to their life if you can. And it's very rewarding. And after a period of time, in a number of cases, they regard you as one of the family, which is a great honour for us and a lovely thing to have.
And that individuality is, I know we've spoken before about how engaging that is, because everybody wants different things in their lives. We all do. And so therefore do your clients. And I wonder whether you could talk a little bit about how you move forward with supporting somebody and finding out where they lack capacity. It isn't the case that you make decisions for them without understanding what their lives are. As you say, it's individual, isn't it?
Understanding capacity is a difficult one. But I'll be totally honest, and there is no hard and fast rule. And to a great extent, this is about experience and understanding your client. Because many of our clients will be described in the old-fashioned way as the walking wounded, who, unless you spent any time with them, you would think, well, I don't really know what the problem is. Particularly those with frontal lobe injuries, who can manifest themselves initially as quite coherent, quite logical, and then when you get in 20 minutes into the conversation, and then half an hour, and then an hour, then you suddenly realise, This is why they've been awarded damages. This is why the reports are saying everything they're saying. And the law is very clear that any decision that someone's capable of making, then it's not for us to interfere. And so you have to weigh up each decision that they're wanting to make in terms of size, complexity, effect, speed, and ability. And I'll be honest, one of the tricks that we do use, if it is a trick, is sometimes you just give a little bit of space between them requesting something and then making the decision to see where they get to. And it isn't unusual at all for someone to request a lot of money, be absolutely urgent. The next money you ring them, and they don't even remember they had the phone call the day before. And so you have to weigh it up and work. And I'm not just saying this because you're a case manager, but work in conjunction with the case manager and the family so that you can try and do what's in their best interests. Best interests is a difficult one because it's not always just logical, which is, oh, they're better off saving that money because, but actually they might be better off spending some of that money because actually it may gives them a feeling of empowerment, which then has an effect on behaviour, which then has an effect on the need for care. It has an effect on the whole family as a whole. So it's not a simple one size fits all, and you have to try to put together the jigsaw to see, well, how do we best deal with these things? Do we always get it right? Absolutely not. Definitely not. But, and the biggest difficulty, I think, is the issue of cumulative decisions. So if someone rings up for £50 this week, and then over and above their normal budgeting, and then they want £50 next week, and the week after, and the week after, and the week after, the law says technically we're supposed to judge each decision on its own. But you can't help but then put this into accumulation. So are they really understanding the big picture because they're now beyond the budget, which means that this may not be affordable long term. And so that is where it gets very complicated, and the edges are blurred, and you try to make the best decision you can make, taking all the circumstances into account. Is that what you're expecting?
Yeah, and I think you started a train of thought there for me around best interest, because I struggle with that a little bit at times, in the sense that it's terribly easy. I'm not fond of it as a phrase. It's terribly easy for people to work on the basis of what I think is best for you, and to not, okay, so the client might lack capacity, but still to hear their voice and still to be able to encourage that sense of what that person's life is about. But as soon as one is involved in helping them make those decisions, then you do take a bit of yourself into that, and you have to be very mindful, I think. I don't know what you think about that.
It's a very interesting conundrum that you have to be very careful not to put your own values of how you think someone should live onto somebody else in terms of your decision-making process for them. When I was first starting out as a trainee solicitor, which was obviously many moons ago, I went to see a client up in Cumbria, and it was the first client I'd actually seen. And by absolute quirk of fate, he had the same date of birth as me. And he was involved in a road traffic accident when he'd been out on a Friday night with his friends to go to the pub. They got the driver, he was in the passenger seat, so as is always the unofficial rule, if you're in the passenger seat, you have to get out of the car and go and knock on the door. This is obviously way before mobile phones. And so he got out of the car, crossed the road in this village, and was hit by a car which they anticipate was doing somewhere between 70 and 80 in a 30-mile-an-hour limit. He misjudged it, couldn't contemplate a car was going that fast, coming towards him, thought he'd make it, didn't make it. Very badly disabled, very badly affected as a result of his brain injury, in a wheelchair, significant cognitive speech issues. And I remember being really, really upset about this. And my dad, who was a doctor, he sat me down because I was still living at home because I didn't know whether I'd passed my exams at that point. And at those stages, if you hadn't passed your exams, you were booted out in October, even though you started work in August. So I was still living at home, and he basically sat me down and said, look, you've got to make a decision. You can care about people, and you should care about people, but you've also got to maintain an element of professional detachment, otherwise you're going to be no bloody use to them. And he worked as a casualty doctor in London when they had all the teddy boys and the mobs and all the fights and the stabbings and everything else. He said that you've got to take that detachment, otherwise you wouldn't be of use. He said, and you've got to apply that also when you've been a solicitor dealing in this kind of work, because you might think you know what's best for them, but unless you understand that client and unless you take that step back, you're not going to do it. Now, I've been to places with other professionals and solicitors where someone's been chatting away and they've gone, oh, he really doesn't understand. I'm saying, you've actually got the wrong person. That's not the Ranger person. That's just the way this family lives. And so we have seen things that we wouldn't have our house like that. But that was the way that people lived before they'd had their brain injury. And it doesn't make it wrong. It's just different. Yeah. And so for me, for example, I wouldn't have a sheep walk through my lounge, which I have seen within the last 12 months. And I wouldn't have horses eating out of the sink in the kitchen. And we've seen all sorts of weird stuff over the years. It does involve a lot of animals, in fact, so I don't quite know what that is. But, and so we've got to be careful that we don't put our values on it, and you make a judgment on best interest. And also, what are their wishes? It doesn't matter if they're irrational. Not only should you, but you're also obliged by law to take into account their wishes. And that's got to be right, rather than you saying, no, this is how you should live and I'm the one in charge. Totally wrong approach. And so you have to tailor your view and you have to take that step back. And I've said it to a number of people I've worked with, just because you live that way doesn't mean so they have to. What's right for them? So,
and when you work in these kind of roles, I think that's part of what you, over the years, become more and more used to, is my way of living is just my way of living, it's no one else's, and everybody else lives differently to, each person, each household. That's part of the joy of human beings, I think.
Well, isn't it interesting that now that we're seeing everybody on Zoom and you get to have a little peek inside everyone's house?
I know, I like your
and it's quite interesting how some people live or where they do their work. And you're thinking, God, what is all that stuff you've got? But that's just different people. So.
Well, it is, but there's also the element of when you do this, you have your little window and you can show what you choose to show. I may not choose to show you the rest of the room.
Well, I'm very lucky I am very lucky because I think there's a lot of people who are working in a bedroom because they still live with mum and dad, or they're in a bed sitter, or they're in shared accommodation in London or whatever, which must be very tough. I'm lucky because I have my own office at home, always have had, because I've always done a bit of work at home. And so for me, I've got luxury for this and very, very lucky indeed. But for a lot of people, working at home is quite tough and not easy, particularly if you've got brothers and sisters and kids, and just trying to educate kids at home as well. Fortunately, both my kids are old enough that they don't have to have input from us all the time. In fairness, but they ask me some questions, I don't know the answers, so it's probably a good job they don't ask me too many. And also school have been very good with them in terms of they've been online the whole time. So, but that's not been the case for a lot of people, and I think a lot of people have really struggled, and understandably, as a result of what's happened, but it happened for the right reasons.
Absolutely, and it's made me quite mindful of clients and families, and how for non-pandemic reasons our clients are often perhaps back in the family home. Everybody's there because perhaps they need to be, and what a difficult circumstance that can be, just very challenging. We've all had our patterns changed in ways that perhaps lift the lid a little bit on some of the experiences clients have.
Well, that was the point I was just going to actually say, is that what we've probably had is a little bit of a snapshot into what some people's lives are like all the time, living with a brain injury with someone that they're keeping at home. In that they can't leave when they want to, they can't go out and about, they've got to stay in. It's hard. And we found it very hard after what is a relatively short period of time. As one of my friends did say to me, said, you know what, I've decided I'm never going to become a criminal because there's no way I can do the time, he says, if lockdown's like this. But, you know, there's clients who've been like that for years and years and years and years, and the toll on family and the individuals must be very, very, very high. And I don't think we probably realised that as much until now.
It felt to me like a narrowing of life, and that is perhaps what happens for people under other circumstances such as you're describing, and a narrowing of life and a taking away of depth and richness, even for a short time, has a tremendous effect, and you can see it on social media, you can see it in the news, articles that are being written. It is an interesting moment, and I don't know whether you've got clients, we certainly have, who've pretty much said, see, this is what it's like.
I haven't actually had that to me, in fairness, but I think, I shouldn't really make a comparison to my mum, but my mum's housebound, and everything becomes quite a big issue, even though we would regard it as a small issue, because the life is compressed. And for a lot of our clients, we've sometimes gone, well, why are they ringing 5 times for this? What's going on? But now we're getting a bit more of a comprehension, because if your life is this big and something happens, then that's a big thing. Whereas if your life's this wide and something happens, then it's not a big thing. And so I hope that we learn from it and are probably more tolerant to our clients who are having an issue with something which then becomes a bigger issue in their mind than you probably would have credited.
Again, that's about the individual lifestyle, circumstances, context, and I might not think it's a big thing, you might. And
absolutely.
Lies the difference between us as 2 individuals with all our own pressures and thoughts and feelings.
It's the classic line, isn't it? It's, if that's their perception, it's their perception. It doesn't make it wrong. It is their perception. So you have to deal with the perception, not what you think is right or wrong.
Absolutely.
Otherwise, you're not actually doing what the client needs. Now, don't get me wrong. On occasion, we will need to say to a client, absolutely not, you're not doing that. And this is why. I'll give some examples. You're not paying £12,000 for a holiday to Florida in August. This was what we've been asked to do recently. No, because I don't think you'll be travelling to, and the holiday company may not be there. I want to pay it. No, this is not in your best interest. So, you know, you have to make a judgment call. Sometimes it's blooming obvious, like that one was. But the client didn't see that. So it's a balance always. Take their wishes into account, try and do what they want to do, but look at the bigger picture, which is probably where majority of our clients really struggle. It's trying to see that overall picture. And the fatalistic view that many of them have, which is, look, I survived this, I could be dead tomorrow. That's not, I want to spend the money.
So how do you, because obviously, you know, one is not deemed to lack capacity just because you make an unwise decision, but where you have a client who lacks capacity to manage their property and financial affairs, you have a deputyship, how do you support people with still making some unwise decisions and actually allowing them to have that enjoyment in their lives? Because often unwise decisions are the things that we do enjoy at the time. We might regret them later. That's normal. How do people still have that richness in their lives, do you think?
What we try to do is to try to work with them with kind of a budget, which is kind of their budget that they can do what they like with, which is not going to get them into too much trouble. So when a case is over, there's normally a little bit of I want to do something, I want to go on holiday, I want to do this. It's like, come on then, get on with it. You choose, decide what you're going to do. And then we also have a contingency budget each year, the stuff that arises. And there's always stuff that arises, be it from I want to buy a koi carp on right the way through to whatever, new cars, etc., which aren't budgeted, or a holiday that isn't budgeted, or engagement, or babies, or all the other things that happen in life. And so, but we're trying to make sure we do it in as controlled a manner as we can. Now that sounds ridiculous in a way, but if you budget that there's going to be some stuff that happens and you can make sure that that's affordable for the client going forward, then they've got that latitude to go. Now, it will depend on your client whether you tell them that they've got that budget or whether you just deal with the stuff as and when it arises, and that's a judgment call that you'll make in your review each year, depending upon how the year's gone before. So for some clients, we give them money once a month, we have a meeting with them once a year, and that's it. Other clients, they might ring 4 or 5 times a day, and that shows the differential, and you will have exactly the same in case managers.
Yeah, we do. And it's, in a way, what they've got is fund money, a fund budget, I guess.
Yes, we call it contingency, probably rather than fund, but yes, you're right.
So what's, I don't know whether you can think off the top of your head and tell us some of the most bizarre things that clients have requested, whether or not...
Okay, well, not necessarily bizarre, but I had a client who lived in Skegness, and we all know that there is a correlation between people who've had a head injury in Sheffield and living in a caravan on the East Coast during the summer. I'm surprised, actually, that more of the case managers don't have actually Skegness offices for the summer, because there seems to be a lot of people who want to go and live there. In fact, so this client actually lived next door to another client who both moved from Sheffield following their injuries and lived next door to each other. We ended up with a neighbourhood dispute, which obviously we couldn't act in because obviously we were conflicted because we had to both. But one of them said to me, "Still want to buy an Aston Martin?" I'm like, so I said, "What are you after?" And he told me, and I said, "I'll tell you what," and I thought I'll try and deflect this. If you save half of it, then we'll put the rest of the money by it and we'll agree a price, and we agreed this price, which was 80,000 at the time. And a year and a half later, he rang me and says, "Right, I've got my 40. He's now been restored to his own affairs, by the way, and he's actually managing to sort his own finances out. But it just shows you what some of the clients are very capable of doing, despite everybody saying he couldn't manage his own affairs. In that particular circumstance, he had quite a predilection to cannabis, and I think the cannabis stopping, which he did do, or fairness to him, was possibly a major factor in him being better able to manage his own affairs.
How interesting.
What else have they? I mean, animals are still the issue. People coming home with horses and they live in a terrace house. And you think, well, what have you done? I bought a horse. Well, where are you going to put it? Not thought about that. Various uninsured cars, motorbikes, go-karts, the rest, swimming pools. It just doesn't bear thinking about. Parrots, yeah. And then the parrot died, just like the sketch. So.
Fantastic. Yeah, so again, it's as variable as the individual, and you never know. I remember we had a conversation a while ago when we were talking about the "I wasn't expecting that" moments that just happen all the time. Even though there will be things you're not expecting, it still has the ability to surprise when the phone rings and that request comes through.
Well, I have to say that the sheep walking through the lounge was one of my favourites in the last 12 months. So we're sat there doing a full review, investment managers there, everything, social worker, the lot. And the sheep walks to the lounge, and we all look at it. Family don't even look. and you just think, what was that about? And it reminds me of the two stories. One, a client I no longer out for now, but I went to see him, and he had 2 Rottweiler dogs. And they were barking away, and he said, "Come in." I said, "No, will you put the dogs away first?" No, they're fine. I'm not the biggest fan of dogs when I don't know them, because just think, be careful. So no, put them away. So, and I kept the front door shut until he'd gone. And then all I heard was this massive commotion. And about 5 minutes later, he comes out, he's got blood everywhere. He's been attacked by the 2 dogs, and he spent the next 5 hours in casualty.
Oh my God.
With him having been savaged by both dogs on his arms. So I was right not to go in.
You really, your spidey senses were working well that time.
Yeah, absolutely. And then there's I don't know if you've heard of, there was a social worker called Simon Armitage who became a poet. And he wrote a book called All Points North about when he was a geriatric social worker. Sorry, well, that's not right. He wasn't a geriatric, so he was a social worker dealing with geriatrics. He went to see a lady in a block of flats, and there was a dog on the doorstep, and he walked in, the dog walked in, the dog was laying around in front of the fire, dog got up, did its business in the corner. He said to the woman, I don't think you should let your dog do that. She said, I thought it was your dog. It was neither dogs at all. And, so
excellent.
He wasn't expecting that. So
no, definitely not expecting that. But it's it's an interesting position to be in as well, to have all that expectation that the client builds up and then makes their call, and then the members of your team at the other end needing to decide how they manage that, and how they give that request. That might be a very sensible request. It might be a request that's going to require some thought and discussion. It's I think often financial deputies are in the firing line a little.
And we will have lost clients when we refuse to do things. But I'd rather lose a client and try to make them do the best for them than just kowtow to what they want you to do. So I had a client who wanted to buy a pub. I'll not say where, but this pub was called the Rampant Horse. And he said, it's a fantastic deal and we're going to do that. I said, well, send me the stuff through. So he sent me through and he says, we want to pay this much for it and all the rest of it. I said, there's a problem with these accounts. And he said, well, what? It's a deal. I'm ready to write the check now. I said, and there was no cost of the actual stock in the accounts. So as if the beer appeared for free that they sold. So all they got in there was sales, but no, obviously, costs at all. And it made no sense at all to buy this. Once you put those in, it was making a massive loss. And someone was trying to take advantage of a chap with a head injury. And so you get this.
Well, what I was going to say, that is another theme, isn't it? That people do still try to take advantage of our clients, deputy or not. Case managers, support workers, you can have as much support around somebody, but particularly if it becomes known in their community that they have access to funds.
It's not just in the community. There are some family members who will take advantage. And I think that, we probably have a spectrum. We probably have 10% at one end where you're trying to convince the family to spend some money because they're so worried that they're not going to have enough money for the future or something might happen, that they're doing all this care themselves, driving themselves to the ground, and you're there, please, it's there for a reason. It will last. You have probably 80% in the middle who are perfectly reasonable, sensible people, and kind of anywhere within that spectrum. And I think there's another, may not be 10%, but there's certainly 5% where the families see this as an opportunity for them not to work and to live for free and to use money for other reasons. And I do get very aggrieved when families want to buy houses that are, say, 3 stories high but not have a lift in it and the client's in a wheelchair. And I say, well, hang on, no, they should have access to the whole of the house. Why? And we do have that as an issue as well. And it's not nice. And you have to have some frank conversations. And sometimes you lose clients as a result, they go elsewhere, but you've got to do what you think is the right decision.
And I don't know whether it's the same for deputyships, but certainly for case managers, sometimes things just need to move from one case manager to another, and we sometimes think it's easier being second case manager because you learn what has maybe happened and what hasn't gone well, and informed by that, and also client and family perhaps the second time around understanding what of case management is case management wherever you get it from. You can start off differently and you can have a better journey sometimes. So some cases I think just need to swap sometimes.
Yeah, I think you're right, and it's the age-old adage, isn't it? Change is sometimes as good as a rest. Mm-hmm. And I have had that conversation with clients saying, we're really not getting on. I think you need to look at someone else. I can make some recommendations. Because I said, otherwise, we're just going to fall out. I'm going to do a load of work that you're not going to want to pay for. And I'm going to get aggrieved because you don't want to pay for it. We're just going to fall out even more. Why don't we just have an amicable party? And you're not going to get on with everybody. We're quite lucky in a lot of respects in that I've got 11 partners in the fraud protection team. And there's a lot of different personalities. So we can actually pair people up, hopefully, with someone who's more suited to them if there's not getting on. But you've also got to have that recognition yourself as a deputy to say, this isn't working, but it's not about me. It's about the client.
Yeah. And
it's what's right for them. And if that means sacking me, then I should do it. And so we have to have that recognition. And you have to take yourself out of the picture and say what's right for them. And so, we have transferred cases to other deputies and said, look, we're not getting on. Maybe it needs a new one, and we'll brief them, we'll give them all the details, and then the same happens to us as well. So, and also we do change case managers, because sometimes it gets to such an intractable position that something's happened, which I am positive will have been done in good faith, but the client can't get past it. And if the client can't get past it, we might just have to say, we're going to have to change, because we need to do other things, but they won't ever accept it because of this other issue where you made the right call, but they just didn't like it.
And to go back to your comment earlier about the privilege of, in some cases, almost becoming a bit like part of the family, because part of the furniture, because you're there for so long, potentially perhaps for somebody's lifespan, and that it's not about us as individuals, it's about the client. And this is the flip side, isn't it? Yes, you might become part of the furniture in a good way, but equally, perhaps the flip side, not. And that's fine too. It's just depending on what the needs are.
But it's like life in general. There's no way that I get on with everybody I meet, and there's no way that everyone meets me likes me, and that's just life.
Yeah.
And it would be very arrogant of anybody to think, well, I can get on with anybody. You can't. And particularly where behaviours are accentuated in brain injury and traits are accentuated, sometimes you need to accept this isn't going to work for me. We're just going to clash all the time. The issue is, actually, most of the time, you probably won't clash with the client. You'll clash with the family. And that's where the issue is. But blood's thicker than water, and they still need their family around them. And if that means you going, then that's got to be the right decision.
Absolutely. So just thinking a little bit, we've talked quite a bit about financial and property affairs deputies, and I appreciate that health and welfare deputies are less frequently put in place. Health and welfare decisions are quite frequent. And I just wonder whether you could talk a little bit about that. Been interested in watching some of the COP decisions, the Court of Protection decisions recently, which have become easier to attend and listen to. Now they've become virtual.
Yeah. There's the issue around DOLS, which is obviously all around the deprivation of liberty safeguards. I don't think I'm talking out of turn that, frankly, it doesn't work that well at the moment, and they are trying to review and seeing how they can look at this and make it simpler. And we also have an absolute mixed bag amongst the local authorities about who will deal with DOLS and who won't deal with DOLS, as you will well know. And for a large majority of our clients, I'll make this observation, the public lawyers wouldn't agree with me, I will make that very clear. I don't think it makes a blind bit of difference whether or not you've got a DOLS order or not, particularly if they're in good circumstance and they're being looked after and case managers in place and everything else. So you've got that independent review and look and everything else. For other clients, absolutely essential to be able to make sure that it's in place. But I think that whole system is in need of review, and in fairness, they're on with that, and hopefully they'll come up with, I mean, I've seen the proposals and it does look a lot simpler, and hopefully will make things a lot easier. It's impossible to completely divorce finance and welfare. You can't. And whilst the court wants us to try and do as much as we can, and I can see why, every decision we make has a welfare element in it in most cases. So when we buy a house, we're deciding where someone lives. That's technically a welfare decision. But we are making the decision about affordability and suitability and everything else. And we do blur the edges, and the court accepts you blur the edges, because how can you not? What becomes really difficult, and I don't have the right answer for this, and it is very individual, is where we have clients as a child living with mum and dad sell their property, want to live there with child, then child goes into 24-hour care with other carers and then says, don't want mum and dad here anymore. And mum and dad say, well, we haven't got a house to go to, what we're going to do. And part of what we try to do is to say to them, don't get rid of your house, hang on to it, because you may never go. But then they look at it as if you're some kind of alien. Of course I'm always going to live with my child. No, you might not. Which is very difficult when their child may be 12 years old at the time when you're having this conversation.
And so I think people find it very hard to hear it for that reason and other reasons too. It doesn't seem sensible and logical very often to them at that stage.
And I think if I was in their scenario with a 12-year-old child that I was dedicated to look after for the rest of my life, who had a brain injury, I'd be saying exactly the same as those parents. But
when you come to the other end of it and that child is now 25, let's say, and wants to live on their own, and mum and dad don't...
Or in a relationship.
Indeed. And you feel terribly for mum and dad under those circumstances. It's so difficult. I've wondered often how we can do that better, whether it's about continuing to try and have those conversations over the years. I don't know. It's very difficult.
I think you have to have the conversation very early on before the case is settled. Just say, have you thought about this? And the problem is that actually can put them off you being a deputy or being involved. Oh, he doesn't understand me, I don't want him. But actually, you're doing your job and trying to manage expectation going forward. And the fact is, I'm no mystic Meg. I can't look into the crystal ball and say whether that child's going to live on their own or not. But in most cases, there'll be a prediction that at some stage they will live on their own or with carers, because parents won't be capable, due to old age, infirmity, or not even being here, of looking after that child. So it is envisaged just by the normal, passage of time that will occur. But for the parent who will have fought so hard to get damages for the child, fought so hard in various fronts on education, social services, making sure they've got the equipment they need, so they'll have had that many battles in their life for that child, for them to contemplate that child be independent of in some form is almost impossible.
And it's a very strange thought that this home that is the family home would be something that the child would stay in and the parents would go, because in more usual circumstances, children leave the family home and make their own way. So there isn't really we're talking about moving people toward more independence, perhaps, and those kind of circumstances, and having those sort of conversations and trying to perhaps marry it up against what might be happening, say, to a sibling, a non-impaired sibling. But that isn't what would happen to the sibling, because the sibling would probably leave the family home and make their own way. So it's a very odd circumstance. You might have a sibling in that same household who doesn't have a disability, and sibling might move on in their lives. But in that sense, they would most likely leave the family home and pursue their life in their own home in that way. This is a very odd, strange, upside down thing, where what you're saying is that in order for everyone to pursue their life, the child whose house it is stays and the parents move on. And that's, in our culture at least,
it's totally the wrong way around.
Unusual thing to do.
It's totally the wrong way around. And in most cases, it doesn't make financial sense for both to move, because adaptations of property are significantly expensive without generally enhancing value of a property much. Certainly they cost more than you get up in the uplift of value. In most cases, not everyone, but most. And so the logical thing is for the child to stay at that house. But then you're getting all the conflicts of, well, who has the biggest bedroom? Who has the master ensuite? Who has this? Well, I'm the parent. Yeah, but it's not your house. And then, well, what do you mean it's not? So you can see how, so it has to be handled sensitively as best you can. And you get some clients who are brilliant with it, just go, yeah, get it. We're keeping our house, we're going to rent it out. We know we can always go back there within a few months' notice if we need to. And then we get others of saying, well, no, I don't want a mortgage because I'm not working. I'm going to look after my child. Very difficult.
Well, it's a very difficult position to be in if you've, perhaps, for example, you've had an accident and your life changed, your child's life changed, but your life also changed, and perhaps you did stop working to care for your child.
Absolutely.
And the house belongs to the child, but it's been the family home. You can imagine how hard that situation would be. I can see why we end up in those tricky conversations very often.
And then you get the added additional circumstances of parents sometimes splitting, and which parent gets to stay with the child who's getting X amount of care, and you feel very conflicted.
Or the needing two properties both adapted for child to spend time in.
We've never done that, other than some small elements, because it's not for the child to finance two properties. And
I believe there's a case just gone through the court of protection on that, hasn't there?
I've not seen it yet, so you know more than I. So I'll have to look out for that. It's a very tough one. Do you know what they decided?
I haven't read the judgment, so no.
Okay.
We'll both have to go and look for that. And it's a bit of a spoiler, because I'm going to be, there's the Open Justice Project, and I'm going to be interviewing Celia Kitzinger tomorrow about that. So.
Right. Well, I can wait for the video then.
Well, indeed. I don't know which order it'll go in, actually, but that's been quite a revelation, lots of people being able to sit in on court of protection proceedings and understand how they work as well, not just the judgments and how they get to them, but just what...
The fact is, though, that the majority of court of protection proceedings are never in open court. It's bog standard box work, as the judges would call it, and it is rare that you end up with a court hearing with witnesses and cross-examination, if nothing else, to try and avoid the cost.
Well, I was going to say it should be rare, you would think.
Yeah, it happens much more in welfare, obviously, because the best interest decisions are very difficult, and most people involved have some form of conflict, inevitably, through no fault of their own. And so it's needed to have that kind of airing of the views so that the judge can make an informed decision. But, MDTs and an ability to try and sit people around a round table meeting often can solve a lot of those issues if people are prepared to cooperate. But sometimes people aren't, or have very fixed views which need to be addressed by the court.
And it's when that happens, it can be a good and useful process, because it is often when it reaches extreme difficulty. And my feeling in looking at some of these has been that you can see why everybody is where they are, and it needs exploring, and it's a good system, I think.
Yeah, I mean, we have a case which is current, where I know case manager and client have a different view about where he should live and how he should live, in terms of both care and whether it be semi-care home stroke living at home. And so the court will have to make the ultimate call. It's not going to be easy, because it isn't an obvious one way or the other completely. I think probably the case manager's got a proper better view on this one, but the case manager's not going to be living there.
It will indeed, and we shall watch out for that. So, Niall, is there anything that that you can tell us about that you're excited about that's coming down the line for the work that you and your teams do?
Ooh, exciting. I'm quite excited about the very fact that we're going to change the way in which we work. I know that sounds daft, but actually I think it's an opportunity for us to throw the rule book out of the window and take a step back and say, how do we do this in a much better way to suit both the client and us, and hopefully, I know it sounds daft for us just to say it, ultimately to reduce costs to the actual client. So we're looking, now that we've got the technology to be able to work anywhere, can we support clients from anywhere in the country? What do we do with that? Everything else. There's huge amounts of questions and lots of issues to address yet. And so I think there will be a sea change in how we do things. I think we'll spend a lot more time on Teams. It's not the healthiest medium in the world, because you feel sometimes as if your behind's welded to the chair and you just go from one Teams call to another. But I think that we're all going to be working at home sometime yet, personally. And so I think that we need to say, how can we make this a positive experience for clients and ourselves? And I think there's a lot of things we can change. So just an example would be, we've managed to convince most of the insurance companies that we can now do proof of lives, which we have to do every year for the structured settlement payments, periodic payments. We can do those by way of FaceTime or whatever. But some of them say they have to see them. And say, well, this is just illogical. So that's a cut down in cost for everybody, and still doing the job. If you see someone on FaceTime, it would be quite an achievement for someone to mop that up, wouldn't it?
You would think so, wouldn't you?
Although there was a story, wasn't there, of a 6-year-old boy in America who got in trouble, wasn't it? Because he was supposed to be doing his homework upstairs, and his mum had a camera on in his bedroom, and he'd managed to mock up a cutout of himself, so it looked like he was sat at his chair working, and it wasn't him at all. So I thought it was quite ingenious for a child.
That was one smart kid who's going to do all right. Yeah. That's fantastic. Well, Niall, that's been really interesting and just great to sort of take a bit of a trot through the world of deputyship, of the welfare decisions and how that happens too, and the work of you and your team. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for inviting me. I hope that it proved to be a little bit interesting for people to do. I've certainly enjoyed doing it, and it's always lovely to see you again, Vicki.
Likewise. Thanks.
Thanks ever so much. Speak soon.
Okay. Take care.
Bye now.